InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts. In today's podcast, we'll be looking at a few public company announcements from One World Pharma Incorporated, trading on the OTC as OWPC. Also looking at KHRN Life Sciences Corporation, trading on the TSXV Venture as KHRN, and the OTCQX as KHRNF. HITI Incorporated, trading on the TSX Venture as HITI and the OTCQB as HITIF, as well as Alcanna Incorporated, trading on the TSX as CLIQ. So first today, starting with One World Pharma Incorporated, who is encouraged by the formal recommendation to allow for international export of dry cannabis flower in a recently published letter from the Colombian Ministry of Health and Social Protection to the President of Colombia related to Law 1787 and Decree 613. The ministry calls for modifications that would allow for the exportation of dry flower. Now, One World Pharma believes that the freedom to sell its dry flower internationally would be of enormous benefit to the company and to the entire industry in Colombia, and would significantly increase the company's ingredient product offerings and scale and reduce time to market. Now, dry flower still represents over 50% of the demand in many markets such as the US, Germany, and Australia, and currently such sales are not allowed. Now, One World Pharma, through its strategic relationships with small farmers, indigenous groups, Fedicor, and the Colombian Federation of Regional Advisors, has access to significant acreage for cultivation, and given One World Pharma's operational strengths, the modifications to Colombia's laws would make it possible to go from seed to sale within 120 days. The company continues to increase its production capacity at its initial farm in Popayan, and it currently is negotiating contracts that would provide it with its own extraction capabilities. Permission to export our flower, that would be indeed a milestone for One World Pharma, said Isaiah Thomas, CEO of One World Pharma. We're well positioned to act on this excellent opportunity with the relationships, technology, and genetics to grow the finest flower at scale and leveraging the tremendous equatorial advantages provided by Colombia. And this would be a great complement to our existing efforts to sell high-quality extracted products under existing law. In Colombia, it does look like there's a possibility for at least some regulation changes surrounding exportation of dried flower. That being said, there are obviously other companies in Colombia who have already done their due diligence and have actually been able to export some products already. Again, those mostly have just been in extract form. If the dried flower market, that is sort of the big expectation for a lot of these Latin American countries. Once that is available, the biggest thing that's going to influence, whether it's in the US or Canadian cannabis markets or just other ones internationally, is going to be price drops. Again, when you look at what the cost and yield you can get from a company like a One World Pharma, a KHRN Life Sciences, Pharmacielo, etc., is they can severely undercut and produce much higher quality bud and dry flower for much, much cheaper and produce it in a much faster turnaround rate. So that would affect the dry flower markets for the global industry. That is something I've talked about several times in the past, and it is something that is very likely to go through in Colombia. Just when and how is going to be the sort of deciding factor. That being said, I don't know if One World Pharma would meet all the strict policies or restrictions that they would probably place around the exportation of dried flower. I'm sure they are working towards that, obviously, but when you compare them, for instance, to a KHRN Life Sciences, who I'm going to be talking about next, that company is focused right away on having the proper certification for all of their facilities and really making sure that they are following every bit of compliance that's out there to make sure that when exportation becomes available, they are ready to go immediately. Whereas, again, for a One World Pharma, they might have to update some of their facilities in order to be approved. I would assume, again, that when, not if, Colombia does allow for that exportation of dried flower, there will be very strict policies surrounding that, similarly to most of their cannabis regulations. Again, when you're looking at a lot of Latin America, they are actually quite strict when it comes to cannabis regulations and the certifications and compliance levels that facilities need to adhere to. Speaking of KHRN Life Sciences, they announced the company has successfully delivered EU GMP medical cannabis product to Germany. In collaboration with Nimbus Health, a leading medical cannabis distributor in Germany, KHRN is now positioned for imminent first sales in Germany, and KHRN products are currently in the inventory at Nimbus warehouse, ready to be prescribed to patients and distributed through a vast network of 300 pharmacies across Germany. Now, this major milestone represents a new revenue stream for the company and positions KHRN's European team to execute on its German medical strategy. and leveraging its partner's large distribution network and KHRN's ongoing investment in physician education, the company has secured an immediate access to the German market. And KHRN 1 1/4 will focus on indications such as anxiety, substance use disorder, migraines, addressing patient needs, and improving access to medical cannabis. Now, Tejinder Virk, the president of KHRN Europe, commented, "Since signing our distribution agreement with Nimbus Health in 2020, the company's European sales and marketing teams have been actively educating doctors and raising awareness of our products. We're excited to launch our portfolio with KHRN 1 1/4, a product that covers unmet medical needs in the German market. And as we continue to expand our presence in the UK and Germany, we will leverage our clinical expertise from Colombia to provide the EU market with additional cannabis-based medical products." Now, through its EU GMP certified supply chain partners in Europe, KHRN continues to expand its offerings of world-class medical cannabis products, targeting the introduction of cannabis-based medicines produced based in those already distributed by the company in Colombia and Peru. And with KHRN's proof of concept now validated in Colombia, the company plans to leverage its clinical data and IP, educational platforms, and technology and systems to expand into new markets. So again, when you're comparing, a few of those companies based in Colombia, I would say still KHRN Life Sciences seems to be the most ahead of the game when it comes to compliance, when it comes to focusing really on how this industry is going to play out globally. They've been very focused on that from the get-go and continue to start to reap the benefits of that. Again, when you're comparing them to some of the other companies based in Colombia, One World Pharma, as well as Pharmacielo, they are now starting to reap the benefits of all their due diligence early on, and you're starting to see that now their products are in Germany. They're going into other markets as well in Latin America. They already have their wellness products in the US and Canada. And again, I would expect their products to continue to get out there once they have dried flower accessible as well. That'll be a huge jump for KHRN as well as One World and Pharmacielo most likely as well. Looking next at HITI Incorporated, who announced that it's filed its Form 40F registration statement with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, fulfilling a significant milestone in the process of the HITI to list its common shares on the NASDAQ stock market. A copy of this form can be found at their website on hitidinc.com. We were the first Canadian cannabis retailer to pursue this prestigious listing on the NASDAQ, and we believe that will allow us to greatly expand our shareholder base, enhance shareholder value, and accelerate our already aggressive M&A initiatives in Canada, Europe, and the U.S., said Raj Grover, President and Chief Executive Officer of HITI. Now, we're currently in several discussions with potential acquisition targets in this jurisdictions and look forward to updating the market soon, added Mr. Grover. Now, the listing of the company's common shares on the NASDAQ remains subject to the approval of the NASDAQ and satisfaction of all applicable listing and regulatory requirements, including the effectiveness of the Form 40F. Now, HITI's common shares will continue to trade on the OTCQB under the ticker symbol HITIF until the NASDAQ approval and the uplisting. And the company will also be releasing its financial and operational results for the quarter ended January 31st, 2021, after the market closed on April 1st. And the operational results will also be available on Cedar and on the company's website. And following the release, HITI will host a conference call with Raj Grover, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Rahim Kanji, the Chief Financial Officer, at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on April 1st. So HITI could have an aggressive couple of months now. Obviously, those financial results will probably have some weight on their NASDAQ listing, and obviously how they filled their Form 40F, as well as the other requirements that they need. But that will be a big step up, not only for HITI as well as for the industry. I do believe they'd be one of the only retailers that would be trading on the NASDAQ, which would be a big step upwards. And then again, their financial results, something to pay attention to when those are released in April. And lastly today, looking at Alcanna Corporation and YSS Corporation, who announced the completion of their business combination previously announced on January 18th, which resulted in a reverse takeover of YSS pursuant to the policies of the TSX Venture Exchange, and the name change of YSS to now Nova Cannabis Incorporated. The common shares are expected to begin trading on the TSX Venture under the ticker symbol NOVC on or about March 24th. Now, immediately upon completing of the transaction, Nova will have 53 cannabis retail locations in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And these cannabis retail locations range in size from 1,200 to 500 or 5,600 square feet and are operated under the Nova Cannabis, Deep Discount Cannabis, Value Buds, YSS, and Sweet Tree brands. And Nova has more than 20 additional cannabis retail locations in development for 2021, And the majority of Nova Cannabis retail locations, including locations previously operated by YSS, are expected to be rebranded as Value Buds and will target the value-conscious consumer and underserved segment of the market that's estimated to account for approximately 70% of the total recreational cannabis market in Canada, both legal and illicit. So again, I've talked about this reverse takeover that's been in the works for a few months now. Obviously now Nova Cannabis will be fully up and running sort of by the end of the month. And again, something to focus on is that they are specifically targeting that value-conscious consumer within the cannabis industry or cannabis consumption market today. And I do think that that is still a massively underserved market within the Canadian recreational space. This is a big reason why the illicit market continues to excel. And again, you're only seeing a few of the smaller private retailers in localized areas that are actually focusing on bringing in more value conscious product, whereas a lot of these chains are focusing on mainly large city pricing and sort of a different overall business approach, which has obviously been successful if you're in larger Canadian cities such as Toronto, Ontario, or most other large metropolitan cities in Ontario or in Vancouver and BC. That being said, though, again, you're not really seeing a lot of those chains be as successful in a lot of the smaller, more rural areas where they're competing with a private retailer. So hopefully for this chain, that will give them a little bit of an edge in the markets they advance into. That's all for today's podcast. Enjoy the rest of your Monday.
That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.